Welcome back to Defending Utah Television. I'm Ben McClintock from defendingutah.org. Today, recently in the news, a major Utah organization, religious organization, made an announcement about a major donation to the NAACP and their college fund. And what does that mean? The NAACP is a major proponent of some things that religions don't usually get behind: abortion, sodomite rights, et cetera, et cetera. And that'll be on today's Defending Utah radio program. And I am joined with a special guest, Dr. Scott Bradley from freedomsrisingsun.com. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Always glad to get together and be able to exchange some ideas about some critically important information. So hopefully we'll be able to do that today.
That's right. If you like what we do here at Defending Utah, make sure that you click on that subscribe button and click on that bell to get the notifications. Also, if you want to be a part of the community, become part of the solution, we encourage you to go to defendingutah.org and click on the membership, the Join Now tab, and become a member today. So it was in the news recently about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints making a major donation to the NAACP. And it's important that we understand the organizations that are prominent, the organizations that are being donated to, and sometimes when we donate to an organization and they use those funds to donate to somebody else, it's important that we know and have informed consent on where that money's going. Dr. Bradley, you've been in this fight for a while now, and you know a lot of the history. You've been around during the civil rights movement when the NAACP was getting started. So not when they got started, because they've been around since before you were born.
112 years. So I'm not quite that old. Okay,
but they've been around.
Talk about that if you wish.
And they were big, they were big during the civil rights movement, which you were around during, and so we wanted to cover some of that. And then some folks, when we brought this up, they say, well, what are they doing today? And so I wanted to bring that up as well. But its founder, Webb Du Bois, was a proud and avowed communist. And in fact, he was as much of a racist as they accuse white people of being. He said in one of their publications that the most ordinary Negro is a distinct gentleman, but it takes extraordinary training and opportunity to make the average white man anything but a hog. So that's the founder of the NAACP and the NAACP's magazine called The Crisis. And so that's the kind of guy that is the founder of the NAACP. And for many years, they actually, because of his strong communist ties and his strong support of a Soviet republic for African Americans, he was distanced. The NAACP distanced themselves from him, but in more recent years, they've began to embrace him as their illustrious founder again. So what are your thoughts on the history? Share with us your thoughts on the history of the NAACP and what they've been involved with throughout the years.
Well, without getting into too much depth, because it goes beyond the scope of what we might try and do here today, W.B. Du Bois is kind of the poster child of what a Black man should be, according to university studies. They completely overlook a Black man by the name of Booker T. Washington, contemporaries with each other. Washington founded the Tuskegee Institute. His principles that he fostered there were absolutely Americanist, hard work, approaching the liberty of the nation and rejoicing in it and so on. Du Bois, on the other hand, was an abject communist. He started out strong socialist, and of course, socialism, communism, different flavors of the same poison. And he absolutely migrated into full-blown communism. In fact, during when the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution occurred, he applauded it. He visited Russia, I think it was 1926. He visited again in 1936. In full support of the debauchery that was going on there, the inhuman crimes against humanity at every turn. And Du Bois was very much involved in that. And it's interesting that he had a hand in it's a kind of it's a difficult thing to really wrap my mind around anyway. Margaret Sanger was the founder of Planned Parenthood, and she was a eugenicist, which basically was somebody that wanted to purify the race by getting rid of undesirables. And of course, it would be argued whether or not she was trying to get rid of the black race, but nonetheless, most of the Planned Parenthood abortions which occur, and that's about 1/3 every year, are perpetrated against the black race. It's genocidal, in my opinion, what they're doing to the black race. But it's interesting that Dubois was one of her advocates and on her board of directors, if you will, in New York. So it's a real enigma to me about some of the strange bedfellows that these things make. But so he had a hand in starting the NAACP. He was also very much involved in Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is the largest abortion provider in the nation. About 1/3 as I said, every year are killed in its hands. And it's interesting that even recently, Planned Parenthood and the NAACP did a kind of a march on Washington, if you will, on behalf of making Washington, D.C. The 51st state. And we don't need to get too far in the weeds on that. But the fact of the matter is, there is some strange relationships going there. NAACP's heritage, absolutely, unequivocally, firmly and undeniably tied to the Communist Party through many decades. They were an instrument of the Communist Party. And in fact, there was efforts of the NAACP to create kind of a Soviet bloc of Black Americans in the United States. And Dubois had been involved in that.
If you want to learn more about that, we encourage you to go to defendingutah.org, click on the Learn tab, and there click on Communism, and there's a embedded video called Anarchy USA, which was made back in the 60s, which is an important video to watch that documents what you just talked about.
In fact, they were seeking the overthrow of the United States. I mean, they would make United States a communist nation if they could, and if not, perhaps a communist state that was to be a black state. Now, that kind of ties into what they're trying to do with Washington, D.C. as becoming the 51st state, because it would have a plurality of people that are black. And maybe that's a resurgence of that kind of effort that they're looking at. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is they have a very unsavory history. They're at their height back in the 60s, probably during the so-called civil rights movement. They had probably 500,000 members, card-carrying members, if you will, of the NAACP. And it's interesting. In fact, I probably would be remiss, and I don't need to go into a lot of detail in 1936 and in 1966, but this idea of communism, David O. McKay, let's look at the 1966 thing. He was also involved in the first presidency announcement in 1936, where they openly disavowed communism in the most clear terms, without going in and reading these magnificent statements from 1936 and 1966. Just a little tiny statement about what David O. McKay said. The position of this church on the subject of communism has never changed. We consider it to be the greatest satanical threat to peace, prosperity, and the spread of God's work among men that exists on the face of the earth. I mean, that's pretty strong words. And then maybe perhaps I'll follow up with, if they have been involved in the effort to overthrow the freedom of this land, United States Constitution, and all this kind of stuff, and perhaps Ben will get into some things about the racist approach to things that the NAACP has historically used. But here's what President J. Reuben Clark, again, member of the first presidency of the LDS Church during my youth. Okay, so for some of you, you may not have heard of him, but yes, he indeed was. He says, I say unto you, with all the soberness I can, that we stand in danger of losing our liberties, and that once lost, only blood will bring them back. And once lost, we of this church will, in order to keep the church going forward, have more sacrifices to make and more persecutions to endure than we have yet known. Heavy as our sacrifices and grievous as our persecutions of the past have been. Now, I'm a history of a lot of things. My background in studies, university, and in my own personal time, a lot in the Middle East, a lot of in the United States history. But history of the LDS Church is kind of an avocation, if you will, also. There are things that happened in the LDS Church early days that I will not speak of in mixed company. It's so diabolically horrific. And what J. Reuben Clark said the first time I read this struck me very, very hard. He says, if we lose these liberties, we of the church, in order to keep the church going forward, will have more sacrifices to make and more persecutions to endure than we have yet known, heavy as our sacrifices and grievous as our persecutions of the past have been. So when we have an organization such as the NAACP and the Communist Party USA, which they were both firmly embedded in each other's affairs and have been for
And
decades.
not just were, but still are.
Yeah, yes, we ought to make that clear. But the fact of the matter is, for decades, they have been seeking the overthrow of things that, as J. Reuben Clark said, and of course there's others like Ezra Taft Benson that reiterated those statements. They've said, look, if this happens, if we lose this, it's going to be worse than it's ever going to be for us ever. And now here we have the church with a strange bedfellows kind of thing it's an enigma to me when Planned Parenthood and NAACP are walking arm in arm in Washington, D.C. for whatever purpose they're doing, and the LDS Church. And I mean, and by the way, I'm confident that we couldn't say this too much. Our grief is with false principles. Our grief is with that which seeks to overthrow the freedom and blessings of liberty and proper government that God bequeathed to us. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the color of skin, in spite of the fact that the new woke generation and the critical race theory and all that kind of stuff would try to turn this into a racist thing. This is to preserve the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, and I pray to God.
Yeah, according to this critical race theory idea, the both of us couldn't do anything unless it was racist. There's the story of the white businessman that he has a white customer come in and a black customer come in, and no matter who he serves first, it's racist. You know, if he serves the black customer first, it's because he doesn't trust the black person and wants him out of the store as quickly as possible. If he serves the white person first, it's because he doesn't like the black person and he's trying to put off serving him. So no matter what is done according to your critical race theory, which the NAACP wholeheartedly supports, we can do nothing, you and I, Scott, unless it's racist.
Well, that's absolutely the case. And the race baiters of the day are the ones that the NAACP seems to be associating with most closely. And so it's a real enigma to me that some of this stuff happens. Now, I know that there's virtue signaling and things that go on in institutions and organizations, but it seems very clear to me that, I mean, if the church made donations to Adolf Hitler, people would say, "Oh my goodness, that's terrible," or to Stalin, or if they were seeking somehow to get Charles
or Equality Utah, or any kind of thing that would be anti-principles of Christianity and the gospel.
Absolutely. And that's what's an enigma. I mean, and we have this Amos C. Brown guy that's part of this donation. I mean, the church has given the NAACP about $2 million a year for 3 years, and then the United Negro College Fund $1 million a year for 3 years. Right?
I think you're getting ahead of us. I want to get into that, but hold on real quick. Let's get into some more of the history of the NAACP, and I'm just going to give a reference to what I'm using. And if you can get a copy of this, I highly recommend it. It's not in print right now, but it's a 4-volume set called the Biographical Dictionary of the Left by Francis X. Gannon. And it's 4 volumes. This is volume 1. And in this volume, it does cover the history. These 4 volumes cover the history and the foundings of basically every single conspiratorial organization up to the late 1960s, early 1970s. And so it's got individuals such as Ed Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and, the NAACP. And you just go through and all kinds of different individuals and organizations and in-depth coverage of their history. And we look at the NAACP even back during the early days. It hailed the Russian Revolution of 1917, where the Bolsheviks took over. In the 1920s, the NAACP started to get their grants from the Garland Fund, which was a major source of funding of the Communist Party. Throughout the years, the Communist Party has officially encouraged their members to join and become leaders in the NAACP, and they have been closely tied forever. In the 1940s, 1946, the NAACP cooperated with the Communist Party as the Communist Party, in one of its most ambitious political projects of all time, established the Progressive Citizens of America and the basis for Henry Wallace's communist-dominated Progressive Party. In 1953, an unusual and total endorsement was given to the NAACP by the communists in their Daily Worker. The Daily Worker, the Communist Party USA's publication, said, quote, "It should be clear that we communists are the first to insist that the labor movement, all sections of it, should give every possible support to any and all campaigns conducted by the NAACP." And the same thing, the NAACP has come out and endorsed critical race theory, and it's been called by people across the board as being a Marxist program. So they are continuing on in supporting this Marxist program. The Daily Worker in 1957 said, again, communists in labor unions are thus pledged to get their unions to support the NAACP to better express the alliance of labor with the Negro people. So the communists have always been a part of this. I'm going to do a screen share of a document from the minutes of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles from back in 1965, where Ezra Taft Benson is quoted, and it says here that Elder Benson, this is the minutes of the 12 again, it says, Elder Benson said he shared the feeling of the brethren who had expressed themselves on this question, that he was confident in his own mind from a study he had made of the Negro question, that we are only seeing something being carried out today that was planned by the highest councils of the Communist Party 20 years ago. So this is something that it was well known publicly across the board for many, many years. And that's their foundations, and it continues to be so. So as a part of this donation, maybe this is the history. I want to go back to the United Negro College Fund, which you brought up, which is closely connected to the NAACP and its foundations, and then we can start to bring this to our day. So Dr. Bradley, go ahead.
Well,
unless you've got some comments on the stuff I just brought up.
Okay, well, yeah. Again, this concept has nothing whatsoever to do with race and everything to do with principles. Mm-hmm. I mean, you think right and wrong, how you guys, it's your motto,
Yep.
And so the fact of the matter is that this has been an historically subversive organization in the United States. And in fact, I think if you read on with those minutes, you'll find that the feeling was that they were trying to make an inroad into the church and against the church in order to disrupt and ultimately perhaps even destroy the church. And so there was an understanding of that clear back in the 1960s about this. But again, you bring up the Marxist philosophy. And if you read the Communist Manifesto, and I recommend everyone read the Communist Manifesto for understanding, not to embrace it, of course, but for understanding that it is conflict-based. It's rich against poor, white against black, religion against religion, labor against management, men against women, whatever they can do to create conflict and disruption. And this has worked for them over and over and again. You go back to the French Revolution, you come forward through any of the revolutions that have happened in the 1800s. You look at the Bolshevik Revolution, you look at the Chinese Revolution, all of those, this was a tactic that was used to create disruption of society. And then through that end result of disruption, to be able to just basically restore peace, if you will, by putting their model in place. So it's, oh my goodness, it's such a mess. Why don't you let us take control of this thing? And again, I'm making this sound rather soft, but the point of the matter is that has been the approach to all of this, and all of the riotings that were so disruptive back in the 60s, and all of the riotings that have been back in the 2020s. All of this stuff, the Antifa, the Black Lives Matter, these things are planned and carried out. Now, back in 1840,
We did a video on that. I want to encourage people to go check out where we documented it was actually the state, meaning the government in all across the board, and we proved it conclusively in Salt Lake City was aiding and abetting the rioters. So if anybody wants to go check that out from last year,
and that gives us cause for pause, if you will, because we look at who our true enemies are, and if the enemies are highly placed in this country, we're on real shaky ground.
Yeah.
But it's like in 1848, the Marx and Engels had to have the Communist Manifesto ready to go to print, which they had it ready by February, because there were pre-planned revolutions that had all been put in place for the spring of 1848. All of this stuff had been put in place by professional revolutionaries, if you will, long before. And they wanted the Communist Manifesto to come out and go, oh my goodness, this is what we've been waiting for. Everybody's ready. I mean, the world's a tinderbox. Yes, it's time to implement communism. Well, that's exactly what has been played on the United States for decades. And we are, I'm afraid, in the very throes of this thing. And that's what's so disheartening and such an enigma to me, is how these things are being fostered and carried out and funded and supported and embraced and cheered by people that in years gone by knew what the dangers were. And so it's just baffling to me, absolutely baffling. So I don't know, we ought to talk a little bit about what's going on nowadays, probably, Ben, because if I'm on your show, I always go long. So
let's not do that. So let's go to the NAACP's website. Go to the horse's mouth. This is a very communist idea, healthcare for all, guarantee all people in the U.S. Can obtain physical, mental, and oral health care when they need it, regardless of the coverage, employment, financial, or immigration status. So they want the taxpayers to be able to pay for everyone's health care, not only Americans, but for illegal aliens as well. So this is health equity. That's exactly what that means. Conduct an audit of federal agencies to strengthen their civil rights and health equity efforts and implementing federal policies and programs. So this is very communist itself.
But before we leave that one first for a second, Ben, let me say something.
Yeah.
The healthcare economy in America is probably about 1/7 or 1/6 of the entire economy in the nation. And so if that is owned and controlled, if you will, by some government agency, that's a huge portion of our economy that has been taken over by a socialistic perspective. Mm-hmm. And so you can see why socialism is attempting to do this. And again, this has nothing whatsoever to do with the enumerated powers of the United States Constitution.
Which makes it illegal.
Yeah. So yet, here they are using this communist approach to things that they're fostering, which would take over probably a 6th or a 7th portion or part of the United States economy, whole hog, in order to do it for racist purposes, racial equality. It always comes back to that in their vernacular. So go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. Another thing that the NAACP is strongly in favor of is the mass murder of the unborn. And they put out an official statement. This was reprinted by care-net.org, and they endorsed abortion here. And let's see here. I'm trying to go through and find the
women of color choose to seek abortion. I mean, they bring it to color all the time. It's astonishing to me. I mean, this is genocidal on their own people. If you think
here it is. So here's the original. Here's the entire thing. So this was back in 2004, and it says, whereas more than 8 decades ago, the NAACP's most distinguished founder, again, so their distinguished founder, this communist, understood that making birth control available to poor women helped them gain control over their lives. So they're equating birth control to abortion. Every woman, he wrote in 1920, must have the right of procreation at her own discretion. Only today, women of color seek abortion at rates higher than their percentage in the population. So instead of saying that that's a problem that needs to be addressed, they're using that as a reason why they're in favor of the right to murder the unborn. In 2004, thousands of pro-choice supporters will gather in D.C. for the March Against Fear to demonstrate their support of the right to choose to kill the unborn. Whereas a woman denied the right to control her own body is denied equal protection of the law, which is a fraud, because once she chose to get pregnant, now you're involving a different body, a different entity, a different person. And so you're not controlling your own body by murdering someone else. If I murder you, Scott, I am not controlling my own body. Shocker.
And that's one of the great lies that is told. They say a right of a woman to control her body. But in truth, it is, well, as President Kimball used to say, like unto murder, that we should abhor and back away from that. And when the NAACP embraces this approach, if you will, it's just an enigma how the church says, la, 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 dancing in the daisies, this is all okay. It's traumatic and dramatic departure from what our belief system is.
Yep. So now we go to the NAACP and the Equality Act, which the church has actually come out against. So funding an organization which is using their resources to fund an act that would actually destroy the religious freedom of individuals and organizations such as the church itself. And then we go to this is the American Bar Association, and talking about the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund and how they have endorsed critical race theory. And they say that it is not a diversity or inclusion training, which is a fraud, but a practice of interrogating the role of race and racism in society that emerged in the legal academy and spread to other fields of scholarship. Crenshaw, who coined the term CRT, notes that CRT is not a noun but a verb. It cannot be confirmed to a static or narrow definition. So again, they're making it broad. And here we see on NAACP on their Twitter page says critical race theory is an academic and legal framework that examines the impact of systemic racism on American society. Refusing to examine our history denotes that nothing is wrong with our systems or history. And so they are, of course, in favor of the radical, extremist, Marxist critical race theory.
Well, see, the critical race theory basically says if you're white, you're a racist. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Absolutely.
But it goes way beyond that. It goes into reparations. I mean, it's like you say, wait. There's a whole bunch of arguments that could be made about this, and in the time we have, it probably would not be adequate. But the fact is, the nation has gone through quite a bit of torture to try to make things right in terms of race, and 2/3 of a million men died, and millions more were maimed doing that during the so-called Civil War.
Well, I would disagree that that's what it was over, but
yeah.
It's a diversion. We won't stick on that.
Absolutely something that continues, particularly at the general government level, at the head of our government, and what's being promoted and these race baiters of today. But I saw a really interesting little statement. Two beautiful little girls, about 3 years old. One is a little American girl, white, that it says, blaming her for racism is as logical as blaming, and had a little Japanese girl, little beautiful 3-year-old age girl, blaming her for Pearl Harbor. There is no connection whatsoever that may be made. And you could say, well, okay, so a whole bunch of people died in the 1860s. What about all of if you say all this welfare system stuff that's happened, there's been payments and payments and payments, trillions of dollars of payments over the last 150 years that
illegally, I might add.
There's no constitutional basis for any of the stuff that happened. And so we have, it's a question right now that there's an attempt being made, and they put out a congressional reparations group to examine it. And if you look at the people that are in the group, it's like, maybe I can predict the outcome of this with my eyes closed and my hands tied behind my back, because you know what their bias is. And so that's how the things go. That's, President Biden and his Supreme Court Presidential Commission about that. You can predict outcomes by looking at who gets appointed to them. And that's what's happening today. And so the racist concepts that are being perpetuated and foisted upon America are really not by regular, everyday, all-American kind of people. This is something that is put there institutionally, and I think the NAACP plays a large role in that with their current approach to their philosophies and policies they're following. And as you point out here, these are taken from their own endorsements, the approach that they're using. So, I mean, whether it's LGBTQXYZ, I don't know what it is anymore. They keep adding letters to it. But
just keep it simple and call them sodomites. It's keep it easy.
This Amos Brown guy, that's getting $250,000 from the church to take people back to Ghana to study slavery and its trade and and everything like that. And it's like, no, we can predict where this is going to come. They're going to come back with horrific stories. They have to go back and seed them back into the nation and get us all weepy-eyed about this thing and how horrific it was. And he's for reparations. He's for the LGBTQ program.
So the church is paying for people to be propagandized into the reparations movement.
It's just astonishing to me. A lot of the things that are going on nowadays, Ben, leave me with a head that can't be satisfied with a few scratches. It's just constantly there.
So obviously, I'm not going to say we're the average person in your ward, but you're an active member of the church, Temple Recommend Holding. And what are your thoughts on this?
I'm baffled. I mean, it's kind of like the virtue signaling that happens with the mask. It's your symbol that you care. It's a facade. It's unreal. It's something that doesn't hold any, just like the mask doesn't prevent disease or protect anybody. This thing it's almost like it's a bribe. I don't know what extortion, bribe. I don't know where to put it. I don't know what to call it. It's so difficult for me to say, like I started to say earlier, if we were funding people that universally are recognized as bad, evil, nasty, horrific monsters, people would say, oh yeah, I get it. But today, much of the generation that's alive today has never
been brainwashed to think that the NAACP is just about helping protect people's rights when they don't know what it's really about.
And the black people I know are good people and we ought to help them. And, that's the kind of mentality that people think about this. But the organization itself has a foundation that really hasn't changed much over the years. They've spun themselves a little bit differently with different, maybe Madison Avenue getting involved to make them with a kinder, gentler, smilier face or something like that. But as is pointed out in their belief systems and in their policies and in their programs that they're putting forth, there's still a lot of room for improvement. Let's put it that way. That's a very mild, euphemistic place to put it.
Yep.
And so their history is not something that we're compatible with in America. And they've been fostering with the Communist Party in the United States. I mean, it's like the African National Congress. Oh, African National Congress. Yeah, they're the people that get elected and everything. It's communist based. That doesn't make them good because they're now called something a little bit different or they put a little different face on them. It's still the same program. And I just don't understand it. It's just baffling.
Well, Dr. Bradley from freedomsrisingsun.com, I appreciate you joining us today. And thanks for the discussion. I think it's important, just like with medicine, that we have informed consent. With the things, that we see, the NAACP, especially in Utah, being in the news this week and being promoted in other ways as organization that people should put their money into. It's important for informed consent. So I appreciate you coming on to discuss these things. I'm Ben McClintock from defendingutah.org. Encourage you, if you like this program, you want to make sure that you don't miss future programs, click on the subscribe button, click on that bell to get notifications. and become a part of the community, become a part of the solution by going to defendingutah.org and click on the join tab and become a member today. Until next time.